there any way of just of getting rid of these old private chats that are on here? When I go to private chats, I have one that's 6:56 p.m. I am talking. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I don't think. I think we have to end it. I don't think.
Okay.
Okay, so we're live.
So do I go to comments or to private chat? I'm going to comments.
To see the comments of people.
Well, right now I'm going to stay in private chat. So you chat to me privately and then tell me to switch to comments if I need to. Okay.
Okay.
I'm in private chat, so you can talk to me privately.
So in the private chat, you want me to
I'll switch back. We're going in 11 seconds here, so just stay in comments. I'm going to go to comments.
Okay, bye.
Well, here we are, 2021, new year. We have new problems. I don't think too many new ones, but we sure have a lot of old problems that we haven't been able to clean up for years. And I guess maybe you could say we have some other carryover problems with our MLAs that we're missing in action or jet setting. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Very concerned with the mixed messages that are coming out. And I'm sure that most of you have heard that today we got another 10-day extension on our lockdown, which I just think is just unacceptable. That this is treating the masses. That they might as well be throwing drugs in our water, saying we need to treat everybody, when medicine has always been prescribed on an individual basis. Are you allergic? Are you okay with this? You know, and a doctor one-on-one consultation. And I'm sorry, but for me, government needs to be the same way. One-on-one is far more important. Look at the problems and go from there. I can't help but think with these lockdowns and churches at 15% and Premier saying that, you know, overall, most people are doing a really good job, but there's a few congregations that aren't respecting the rules, so we're going to shut you all down. It's just unbelievable to me how he continues to go to broad spectrum, big solutions across the province, and he's done it again with COVID lockdowns. And there are areas that are under more stress than others, but certainly many regions, and especially in rural Alberta, where businesses can and should be open for sure, they're all being told to lock down. And again, he promised us that he wouldn't pick and choose, but yet if you run a hair salon, you've been chosen as a bad person and a bad business. If you run a fitness gym, which I think are the healthiest people in the province, and wish I spent more time in one or I had one I was going to, you're shut down because you're a bad person and you're causing the problems. High school, we can't get together when, you know, we know that this is not a problem for young kids, no different than any other flu season. Actually less of a problem for young kids than the regular flu season. I find it fascinating that they continue to talk about all of these COVID deaths day after day, and it's an absolute tragedy. It's a problem. But what about the other deaths that day? They're removed out of the way. If we're going to talk, if 60 people died today, don't tell us about the 10 COVID ones without telling us about the other 50. And it's an ongoing problem. And I was really hoping that the Premier would see the importance of the big picture and looking after all Albertans and not focusing, I guess, the guns on the entire province rather than the area. And we know senior facilities need the care. The other problem that I just really concerned about is the fact that we're spending billions of dollars, over $20 billion. And do we have a more robust healthcare system? Don't know how many of you got to watch his little Facebook thing today, but in there he talks about the PCR tests and that, yes, don't worry about the false positives. They're not important. Well, why tell us? Why tell us that there's 1,200 people that tested positive today And if it's not important, don't tell us. There's a subliminal message there that they're putting out in order to keep the fear level up amongst the people and the angst, and again, where people are turning against one another. And it's very concerning for me that he continues to play these games. But what I found more problematic is as he goes further down and he's talking about the problems. Looks like we've got a frozen screen now. Hope you can still hear me. David, can you give me a thumbs up if I'm still going? There we go. Rural internet, it's a blessing, but sometimes it's a problem as well as a blessing. So anyways, he goes on a little bit further and he shows the chart of how the hospital cases, which again, that's what he should be talking about, is hospital cases, and showing how, the hockey stick taking off. And he says, we've got 800 people in our hospitals, and if we didn't have the lockdowns, we might have 1,000 or 2,000, and that would collapse the system. And I go back, and I've said it earlier on, is that, if we have an emergency act and we have an emergency preparedness plan in place, then this is the time to implement it if that's what it's needed. I guess by the Peter Lougheed, there is a field tent set up. I didn't get the answers today whether or not they're using it. I'm not familiar if they are. But what would we do, and what are we going to do if we actually get a deadly virus and have thousands of people that are sick and need hospitalization, when we've seen that this one has put our entire economy into chaos and our healthcare system, and it's a concern. And so when he tells us that they're spending $20 billion a year on healthcare, and 800 COVID patients that need to be hospitalized are collapsing the system and they're shutting down other ones, I think we've had some poor planning. And I want to talk a little bit about just the paramedics and those people that get us to the hospital here tonight. And we've got a special guest that I'm hoping is coming on, and he lives in rural Alberta as well and has been having trouble with his internet this afternoon. But I hope that he'll be able to come on and to be able to share some of his experience. He's a retired paramedic now. And I had the good fortune of speaking to a paramedic this afternoon in Calgary. And he tells me that there's approximately 100 of the 500 paramedics there that are off duty right now. I shouldn't say off duty, but that are sick or being, stressed or coming apart. And our frontline service, our paramedics, are being stretched to the limit. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But to wrap up, before we go into COVID and the paramedics and those problems, I just want to, again, reemphasize that we spend $20 billion a year on our healthcare, and we have 800 COVID patients, 140 some in the ICU, and we're being told that that's overwhelming our system, and we have to shut down our economy in order to prevent it from collapsing. I find that unacceptable. The other thing that I find unacceptable is the fact that we have MLAs that when we're locked down, and yes, I know the rules are saying that you can fly, but they specifically asked us not for pleasure, not for gatherings or anything else, essential travel only, and yet we had MLAs that left. I've talked about this for 15 years, the importance of accountability, and it isn't the Premier's job to say what sort of punishment each of these will receive. We need the Premier to keep his promise, and we need the UCP MLAs to keep their promise and to have recall. The times when I ran and I talked to people at the door, I says, I don't know that they'll pass legislation and have recall, but Paul Hinman is always accountable through recall. And I said, 50% plus one of the total number of votes from the last election sign a petition, I'll step down. I might run again, but I can be held accountable, and you don't have to wait 4 years. If these people had some integrity, had some honor, they would make that promise to Albertans, and Albertans could decide. Just the fact that they might offer it could possibly be enough penance that many Albertans would say, well, they realize how serious this is. But for them to say that we're above the law, that we're above reproach, that you can't fire us, is unacceptable for me. And I think for many Albertans, and it's angering them that these people are untouchables, and oh yeah, they've lost a few $1,000s off their salary because they're being removed off of committees, or they're no longer a minister. But that's not good enough, in fact, for many Albertans, and they should have that right to make that decision. But let's switch back to the paramedics, the problem that we're having, and this idea that the system's collapsing. But David, do we have George on? And maybe I need to get my glasses here so I can read. There he is. George, can you hear me, and can the people hear you?
I can hear you, Paul.
I cannot hear George.
Check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And Mike, I can see him, but I can't hear him. George, can you nod your head if you can hear me? Okay. David, can you put in comments? Let's see here. Oh my goodness, we're getting a lot of comments here. Can the people hear George? Can he introduce and tell the people who they are, or can the people like myself not hear him? Okay, it says that we can hear him. So George, if you want to tell the people a little bit, this is going to be a real problem for me, not being able to hear you. Tell the people a little bit about yourself and your experience in paramedics, and we'll see if we can get this technical problem served by them.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, I appreciate you calling today, Paul. And I've been flogging this poor, tired horse for going on 12 years now. The crazy stuff that's going on with the emergency medical services in this province. And, hats off and a shout out to Tyler Shandro, because he's the first out of the last 5 health ministers that has given me the time of day and that I've been able to speak with. And, but I've been an advanced care paramedic for almost 43 years. I retired a year or so ago. And, but I've been, some of you have probably seen me in the media and newspapers and television and Maclean's magazine and whatnot, trying to get, and the big problem is the, what they call code reds, where there's no ambulances available to respond, which has been going on for years and years.
Is it going to backfeed, or is it going to be okay?
Can you hear me, Paul?
Oh, I can now. Yep.
Okay. So we talked about the these code reds that go on throughout the province, and code reds when there's no ambulances available to respond, and all the lobbying and talking to people that should be able to make a change, make a difference. You get a story that, well, it's multifaceted, it's a big problem, blah, 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 blah. But nobody in the last 12 years has been able to figure out or even try something to change this, to make a difference. And you've got ambulances tied up for hours and sometimes entire shifts on end in hospital hallways because they can't offload their patient. Totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. And I told Minister Shandro that. I said, that's not EMS's job to be sitting with patients in a hospital hallway. That's not our place. We're not good at it. We don't have the resources. And when we're sitting in a hospital hallway with a patient, we can't respond. And I sent you a little clip that somebody had sent me here a couple of days ago, Paul, with all the ambulances showing in Calgary. There it is in red. The guy that sent, they call it the angel of death with the code reds. That's not an unusual occurrence to have no ambulances available to respond.
Okay, George, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay, let's stop for a minute there. David, can you put up that chart from 2016 to show the code reds? Okay, this is produced back in 2016 and 17, if you see there in the bottom left. The EMS crisis in Alberta, 135,000 overtime hours, 1 hour per patient. 653,000 hours were spent by paramedics in hallway waits, and this has been going on for years. And I didn't get to hear everything you said, George, but I just got to go back, and I've told this to George and my other paramedic friends. When I was an MLA, I actually went up. I was MLA for Calgary Glenmore, so I went up to the Rocky View at 10 o'clock at night, and I stayed up all night and watched the emergency room process as people were coming and going, and it took some restraint on my part to not to get up to want to help people that were coming in. But anyways, I guess long story short, there's two simple things that I absolutely felt way back then in 2011 that we should have been doing. When somebody goes into emergency at the hospital, it should be like when you go to Cabela's and you're in line to want to look at a gun. High demand for that. And so they actually have you pull the tab and you get a number. And you need to be able to do that. When somebody comes through the emergency door, they should be handed a number, and they should ask, what's your name? Do you have your healthcare number? And what's your problem? And that nurse should be doing that quick triage right there to see whether this is an emergency or someone with just the flu, whether they've got, migraine headaches. But they should know the second they come through. I watched one gentleman come in. It was just before midnight. He'd fallen down, hit his head. He was in his 70s. He was dizzy. And bottom line, he wasn't feeling good enough to stand in line to get to the front of the line to the bank tellers there with their bulletproof glass and everything else. And it was unbelievable. I saw another individual who was sick, went to the bathroom. They were gone for more than an hour and nobody to go and check on them or to see if they're okay. He had no number, so it's not like they're going to call him and say, oh, is Paul Hinman out there? You're next in line. Where are you? It's just unbelievable. But then to me, when we go to the next level, where we have paramedics that are out there to rush and to save our people and should be there, faster than the fire truck across the province. And where are they? George told me last week or 2 weeks ago when I was speaking with him that he actually had shifts where he was shifted off and in the hospital, and when he came back on his next shift, that same patient was sitting there and they had to look after him. And so to me, the two things that had to be changed way back then is, one, take a number and be triaged when you come through the door. And number two, when an individual can drop someone off at the emergency center or when the paramedics show up, it's the hospital's responsibility from that moment on for that patient. But George, tell us one of your experiences, that your hallway wait times. It's just, well, maybe David, you need to show up the next picture that we have by Daryl Anderson and his reporting for 2019, again, pre-pandemic. You have that one. Okay, the Calgary EMS system has red alerts, meaning no ambulances were available at times for 116 days last year. And it's very fine, but we think last year is 2020, but this is in October last year. So he was referring to 2019 pre-COVID crisis. So here it is again, showing the problems. But now, George, maybe you want to make a few comments on that, because I get running at the mouth. It irritates me so bad.
Well, things haven't improved any since then. In fact, it's gotten worse. And what people need to understand is when the city of Calgary, when it's in a code red, when there's no ambulances available to respond, EMS management will come on and say that, well, it's usually for 2 or 3 minutes at the most, you have a code red. But what they don't say is that if Calgary's in code red, all the surrounding ambulances, the High River, Okotoks, Pritis, Black Diamond, sometimes Vulcan, Chestermere, Airdrie, these ambulances are all sucked into the city to do calls. And so it's not just the city of Calgary that doesn't have any ambulances to respond. It's that whole big area. my longest response time to a critical call, a cardiac arrest, was almost an hour and a half. There's lots of medics out there with similar stories. I've seen ambulances responding from Vulcan to Calgary for a cardiac arrest. When I was working at a Nanton, 2 times we were dispatched to chest pain call in the Crow's Nest Pass. And again, EMS's management comes on after a little news blurb and says, we want Albertans to know that in spite of what Porter says, flapping his gums, is that with our borderless system, we always have an ambulance available to respond. And you as the Albertan are going to get the closest ambulance, which is comforting and heartening if you don't know what's going on. But what they don't know, where's that closest ambulance? And it can be an hour and a half away. And that goes on all the time. I mean, it's still happening. And it's why I have been unable to get anybody in authority, health ministers on down, to actually address this and do something is mind-boggling to me. This isn't a tough fix. This isn't a hard fix.
I want to ask you a question here, George, because for me, and again, neither one of us are hospital administrators. We're not on that upper end, but yet if you back up and have a business mind and look at, how to run a business, I've always felt the worst thing that we did in Alberta for healthcare was to go to central planning and having the central planners do it. They've done that now with the ambulance services, which was a real downgrade, especially for rural Alberta. We used to have an incredible system, and in the small towns, especially with the volunteers, I mean, they were often scooping and having people headed to the city, whether it was Lethbridge or maybe Cardston or wherever, in less than a minute. And I always use the example of Sterling because they had an incredible volunteer ambulance and fire department. And they're about 15 minutes, when you're going fast to Lethbridge, but they generally had a pickup time of less than 2 minutes when the alert went off, and they would pick somebody up and go. And now it takes 20 minutes from somebody from Lethbridge, if they're available, and to go and to find, where the people are because they don't know the streets. And again, the chances of an ambulance driver going to a town that he's been in before when they're not located in those towns is remote, and they don't understand it. In towns, sometimes the streets are going east and west, or the avenues are north and south, and vice versa. Raymond and Edmonton are 2 confusing ones because you can be in the south, but it still says you're on the north, but those people are there. But the whole system is really problematic, and being centrally run just compounds the problem. And George, what I'd like you to do is to comment a little bit on this idea of taking ambulances, whether it's from High River, whether it's Okotoks, and just share the problem with that. And again, isn't the solution for the ambulances to be in their town? If it's a High River ambulance, shouldn't that be running for High River? And the taxpayers of High River should know their ambulance is there and not be in the system. I guess you call it a priority list, because isn't Calgary the priority in Edmonton, and they bring in the rural ambulances to try and reduce the red alerts?
Exactly. And that's exactly my point all these years is, why are the citizens in Calgary more important than the citizens in the Claresholms and the Airdries and the Calgary? If you've only got 2 ambulances available in Calgary to respond, it can take a little while to get an ambulance. But if you've got no ambulance all the way to Claresholm, I've seen times when there's not an ambulance available to respond between Calgary and Lethbridge. They're all doing a routine transfer, or they're stuck in a hospital hallway. And if you only got 1 ambulance in Calgary, it's going to take you however long to get to that patient in Calgary. If your nearest ambulance is in Calgary and everybody else in the surrounding areas in Calgary, that ambulance has to go all the way to Claresholm or all the way to Crossfield or wherever it's going. Much longer response times. And you're right. They pull all these rural ambulances in, and you mentioned when it was before the government took over, most of these little communities had their first line crew, and they had a backup ambulance with people on call. First line was gone. People stayed at their jobs and did whatever. But if a second call came in, they'd drop and run. Well, when the government took over, all these backup units, these second and third line ambulances disappeared. So they've only got one. There's a couple around. Pincher Creek is operating a little bit different system, and they've maintained, and I'm aware of a couple that keep a third ambulance there at their own community's expense, just trying to have an ambulance in their community. And to have these ambulances stacked up in hospital hallways for hours now is ludicrous. It's absolutely crazy. We bring a patient into your hospital. That's now a hospital patient.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be sitting there waiting, babysitting a patient, because we can't do our job when we're sitting stuck in a hospital hallway. And why this has been allowed to go on forever like this is just, people have died over this, but nobody seems to bat an eye. Like, they sweep it under the rug. They come up with these excuses, these little smoke and mirror explanations, and it goes away and nothing changes.
I actually spoke with one paramedic who says that he had an individual with a heart attack, and the hospital's attitude is that if you're there caring for them and you've given them the drugs that they need, that they sit there. And he says, I lost a patient begging them to say, look, I'm losing him. You need to take him. And they just says, no, we're full. We can't. And I just can't imagine the mental stress that must be on paramedics that are there at a hospital, knowing their patient needs better care, and they're stuck in a line, and they can't even talk to the doctor. Like the one guy told me, 30 minutes with a patient. But any comment on your priority as a paramedic versus they say the safest thing to do is to walk through that front door, because we are pretty good if there's been a car accident and somebody comes in that needs to get in right now. When you pass that threshold of true necessary emergency interaction, you get through all of the lineups and get in there. But what can we do to help paramedics to, well, first of all, like you say, that it should be the hospital's responsibility, but maybe just share a few experiences that you can about sitting in the hallways and the problems that have happened there.
Well, there's a myriad of that, and an awful lot of these, Paul, are patients that they call the ambulance because they have a belief that if they can't go by ambulance rather than private car, they'll get seen sooner, which is a fallacy. Doesn't happen, obviously.
Yeah.
And we get people calling for ambulances for mundane things, but the medics are loath to not transport everybody, because kind of an unwritten thing is if somebody calls, we have to transport them, and they don't want to cancel on a call because of possible liability, and there's all sorts of different facets on this. But you're seeing post-traumatic stress issues epidemic.
Okay, can I ask you a question, because you've touched on this? Do you think that the paramedics should be able to use their professional judgment and say this person needs to go to a walk-in clinic and deliver them to one of those 24-hour walk-in clinic as opposed to the hospital? Like, should there be some professional judgment on paramedics on where someone needs to be? And again, the whole healthcare system is protected from lawsuits, the individuals, but what's your thoughts on something like that?
Absolutely, they should. Absolutely. They shouldn't be transporting a lot of patients to plug up a hospital hallway. You're going to be stuck there. And the onus is on people, on the citizens. Like, you call an ambulance because your kid has a tick on them. How to get a tick off. So you phone EMS. And it's not just the citizens, it's the hospitals. The simple thing to transport this patient in for their appointment from a rural hospital, send them by ambulance. You don't need an ambulance. I've brought patients in to Calgary from an hour and a half away to have insoles fitted for their shoes, for a dental appointment, for things like that, where your ambulance is tied up for 8 hours.
I'm going to ask you the question that you and I both know there isn't an answer, but why will they not change the transportation of moving people, like you say, for their feet, for other things? Why are we having ambulances do that, especially after 10 years of red alerts and they're still doing it? What's wrong with the system?
Good question, Paul, because if you look in the Alberta Health policies and procedures, I can't remember what they call them now, guiding principles or something, there's a color chart in there. Your patients are red, yellow, green, blue. Red is acute, serious, and absolutely, if you got a patient in the hospital that's doing poorly, that's in trouble, it's a red patient, needs to go by ambulance into the city, tertiary care. Absolutely. Most yellow patients would go by ambulance. Most green patients should go by private car, by taxi, by handy van, whatever. And their blue patients, it says in there, don't go by ambulance. We transport blue and green patients all the time from rural hospitals. And
who sends them out to do this? Like how do they do it?
What's that? Sorry, Paul?
I gotta say, who actually is in charge that sends out an ambulance? Like when the call comes in, that they send out an ambulance for blue patients. Like why is there not a secondary system?
Good question. And you know how easy that would be to change? That could be changed overnight.
Yep.
But nobody will do it. Nobody will take a stand and do it. I've refused to transport blue patients when I was the only ambulance left in Southern Alberta, and they still tried to get me to do it. Well, just take them anyway, and send me a memo, send me an email. I'll look into it tomorrow. No, and I shouldn't be driving this. I shouldn't have been driving this the last 12 years, and you can't have your medics telling dispatch and telling management what calls they are going to and not going to do. But somebody's got to take a stand here. Somebody's got to do the right thing. Somebody has to do the right thing for not only for patient care, but for the medics. The medics know nobody's got their back. We have another medic suicide, and you see management on television, oh, this is a terrible thing, we're going to take immediate steps to mitigate this so it never happens again. And I tell people, just watch what happens. A week later, you get a memo that says, anybody having mental health problems, here's another number you can phone to talk to somebody. That's it. That's not leadership.
What can you tell me, George, that I understand there's like 100 out of 500 right now in Calgary, approximately that are on leave or stress or they've been exposed to COVID. I just can't imagine, like, when the system is already strained so bad and 20% of the people are on leave. Why can't they react and do something?
That is a sign of a very sick organization. No pun intended. That is a sign of a sick organization. They know nobody's got their back. And in this line of work, people tend to really extend themselves for strangers, for others, to make a difference, to save a life, to comfort, to do these different things. And when the only expectation is to give more, to give more, to give more, and nobody looks after the medics, it doesn't take long for people to figure that out, that nobody's got their back. And they burn out. They burn out, and when they have a problem, there's nobody there for them. Here's a number to call if you're having trouble. What's with that?
Yeah. Well, another question that I have for you to respond to is that what kind of pressure is on a paramedic when you already know they're stressed and not there? And I had one guy the other day tell me he showed up for his crew and he was the only one who showed up. And so they ended up matching and getting over, shutting down one ambulance and saying, well, we don't have enough for that, and shutting it down. But what does it play on the individual's general health to call in and say, I'm not going to be there when they know their shifts are going to start, and they know that their other colleagues now are going to be even more stress on them?
Yeah, and that puts more pressure, and as I say, people just keep coming, they keep showing up, they keep doing what they can, and hope things get better. But it's common, Paul, to have 6, 8, 10, 12 ambulances booked off any given time in Calgary because they don't have the staff. So that contributes as well to your code red. You don't have enough ambulances in the first place. And people go to work when in a lot of cases, when they shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at the comments here. Does anybody have any comments? I'm not seeing any that are actually referring to ambulances or paramedics. I think that they're heroes when they are able to show up and do their job, but it's appalling. And I guess I want to ask you this question, George. How many hours in a shift would you say you're actually doing your job versus babysitting in a hospital or transporting somebody? What would you say would be the efficiency rating if you were to say, this is how many runs I was on for an emergency to go help someone that needed a paramedic versus being a taxi driver or a hall doctor to look after patients?
That percentage would depend on where you work.
How about Calgary then right now?
You're working in industrial, or if you're working rural, or if you're working in the city. But those that are working active ambulance stuff, it's a small percentage. I can't put a number on it, but it's a small percentage, because most of your time is taken up doing stuff that, like sitting in hospital hallways, that we shouldn't be doing. And it's frustrating when you're sitting with a green patient for 6 or 8 hours in a hospital hallway, and you can't respond, and calls are coming in for emergency calls that you're closer to, but you can't go.
Have you ever been asked to say, hey, you need to look after these 2 people because we have an emergency heart attack and we got to get one of you crews out of here? Do they ever do that, where they say that, look, you're going to be responsible for 2 or 3, or what's the stretch or the capabilities of doing things even amongst yourself to try and help someone else who actually needs an ambulance?
You hit it right on the head. It's amongst themselves, and there's some terrific medics out there, and they look after each other as best they can. And there's crews that'll take 3, 4, or 5 patients from other crews so they can get that many more cars out on the street. And so now that one crew that's stuck there is looking after maybe 4 or 5 patients themselves at a time, so they can get crews out. But that shouldn't be stuff driven by the medics. We should have some leadership.
Here's a question that you can answer, because I kind of know your answer. But he says George needs to head a committee to spearhead the change to the ambulance and end the healthcare. Do you want to tell these people a little bit about how many years you've been trying to make some changes in that situation?
I've been flogging this poor tired horse for almost 12 years, and I've offered. They hired me, and oh golly, 10 years ago, to do a deployment review for EMS or the province. And I told them then, I said, why are you hiring me to do your job? Your management, you want to be the leader? Lead. Stand up and lead. This isn't a hard fix. You don't need a committee. You need a leader that'll stand up and say, that's it. That's enough. We're not doing this. That's not our job. As of this day, this time, this isn't happening. I need to look after my staff. We need to be able to do our job. And this is over. We're not doing this anymore. But I don't know. I actually offered that with the health minister, Sarah Hoffman.
Yep.
I sent her a letter, and I said, Sarah, I'm not looking for a job, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll put
I'll
this
fix it for you.
I'll put this train back on the tracks for you. I'll make you look good. I'll make your party look good. I'll save you a pile of money. I'll put a management team in place that'll do a smoking job for you, and I'll walk away. Wouldn't cost you a cent. And their
Yep,
response, we encourage you to continue voicing your concerns with your management team.
Yep, I appreciate that. David, do you have that one article? And I know I sent you too many, but the burnout rate that that Anderson put up by the CBC, do you have that one by chance that you could throw up on the screen for a second here, or for a minute? I think it was the third article I sent you was about burnout. I guess this is terrible when we can't talk to each other. It's going through text and whatnot. But anyways, though, so I don't know, maybe David can't hear me now at this point, but oh, here it comes. You know, internal memo shows Calgary EMS is on a hiring spree while trying to stretch the lifespan of ambulances. Scroll down a little bit, and not such little screens on mine, but does this one talk about hospital burnout, or that there was the next article I think that was actual hospital, or I mean paramedic burnout? I can't read it. It's so little on my screen, and now I don't know what I did with my glasses, so can't. Yep, it's destroying me as a person. Calgary Paramedics says the job is taking toll on his mental health. George, do you want to share with the people what your colleagues that you're still staying in touch with, what they're having to say right now in the system?
I have people call me from time to, I get a lot of texts and calls, but I get calls sometimes with people in tears that are so frustrated. And one of the aspects of burnout comes from constantly striving to do better, to make a difference without any support. And so many of these avenues are driven by medics on the floor. Like getting ambulances cleaned and stocked and getting them out the door ready for the next crew coming on is driven by medics on the street. It's the
expand on that a little bit. What do you mean? Because I know that's one of the problem, that people come to their next shift and they don't even have time, especially like if there's a call to restock and stuff. Just explain to the people a little bit about that situation, especially with code red and in dire situations.
A big problem with the staff is getting off on time because of the code reds, because they're sucked into the city, rural guys and stuff. It's almost every shift, I would think now, that people can't get off on time. And so when they do get back to station, the next crew coming on, they don't want them spending any time restocking, cleaning. They need them back on the street because we don't have enough ambulances. And so you're getting ambulances that aren't in optimal clean condition. They're missing equipment, they're missing drugs, they're missing stock. And so there's some people in there right on the floor that have taken the initiative to get these units ready, get a backup unit ready, get whatever units they can, get them clean, get them stocked, get them ready to roll. So when that crew comes in, boom, they're gone.
Do we have very many ambulances because of the shortage of frontline workers that are actually sitting there idle? Like, I don't even know how many ambulances they have in the Calgary area, whether it's 10 or 20 or 50. But how many actually sit idle because there's 100 paramedics that aren't coming in to work?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, it's not that uncommon to see 6 to 12 ambulances not on the road because there's nobody to man them.
And so with that, would there be a crew that could restock, and they could actually send out a new crew with a new ambulance and bring the old one in and have someone restocking it? Or does that need to be something that the actual paramedics need to do because they were in it? And is there somewhere of efficiency where we can have, I guess, someone doing a job like that the trained paramedics that need to be out on the next call could be going?
Yep, there's a guy that was on a regular street paramedic there, and he's got himself some helpers now, and that's exactly what they've pushed through, and they're doing that as best they can, at least in Calgary. I don't know if they have a similar thing set up in Edmonton, makes perfect sense for some of these people that are on light duty, that are, coming back from injuries or being phased back in. But here's a perfect thing they could do to get these units ready to go and out the door. And there's a lot of different reasons for the high stress, but a lot of it's constantly striving and if you have a job where that you're appreciated, and that that if you're having trouble, somebody's standing behind you, you can put up with a lot more than you can if you're out there all by yourself. And unfortunately, that's the way it is. It's a big organization, but that doesn't mean we can't be compassionate and caring and looking after our own people. It shouldn't. Again, that the medics look after each other as best they can, bless their hearts, but they should be getting that from management. Oh, I lost you, Paul. Can you still hear me?
Okay, I'll switch back. I actually put my computer on because I thought you were here, that you were taken through my phone, but I'm just hearing, but the mic's taking me. But do you find, is the healthcare system is it being demoralized because they're pitting one against the other? Like, is a hospital sometimes trying to blame the paramedics or the doctors, or like, do you feel when you're talking about someone has your back, and I know your colleagues have each other, but do you feel that you're part of the team in the hospital or with the doctors, or do you feel like they keep you at a distance and you're kind of being thrown under the bus and making your job tougher?
Good question. I think generally speaking, the medics and the nurses and the doctors are pretty much on the same page. Now, there's exceptions, but generally speaking, I think they're pretty much on the same page. But the hospital is the same scenario as EMS. You're telling me that in the last 12 years, nobody in management in EMS has been able to come up with one innovative idea, one solution, try anything new in 12 years. And it's the same thing with the hospital. We've got this bottleneck and emergency that's been going on year after year after year. Who are these administrators? You're telling me in all these years that nobody's come up with any solution? Seriously?
Yeah, it's. I wish that I was talented enough that I could do that joke. Who's on third and who's on first. Do you know that one, George?
Yeah.
But the question is, who's in charge? And that's why I was asking. Like it just seems passed on and to the next one. And the two things that I have said for years is, number one, we need to change from global funding, that all of these hospitals get their funding up front, and then they see every person that comes in and every incident as an expense. And for me, I just really believe that if the hospitals were paid when a patient comes in and needed that bed, then okay, here's the $1,000 for that bed that night, here's for the doctor for doing that, then they sent a bill to Alberta Health. That I think it would change the system really quick. And also, if this was supposedly a competitive market, and the Rocky View was competing for patients with the Peter Lougheed and the other ones, that when you look up there, and again, when I travel down to the States, which I haven't been able to do for a year, but each time you go through a town, especially when you get to the big ones, they're advertising, hospital wait time 3 minutes. Yep. Hospital wait time 15 minutes, and they advertise that so that they get customers. And to me, if these hospitals were being paid for their wait times, and there was bonuses that you're under 5 minutes or 10 minutes, which is just unheard of for us here in Alberta. But I agree with you, George. It's unbelievable that after all these years, we are continuing to bang our head against the same brick wall and can't get them to realize that paramedics should not be sitting in the hallway with a patient. They're at the tertiary system. They're able to get the best treatment. And what do we have here? Again, I don't know where I put my glasses. Did I go out?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, Paul, because when the government took over EMS, prior to that, inter-hospital transfers from this hospital to that hospital came out of the hospital budget. When the government rolled it into one, it came under a global budget. So they didn't have to think about it anymore. Inter-hospital transfers went up 30% overnight.
Wow, that's a stat I didn't know.
So all of a sudden, we're already under pressure with all these extra transfers to do on top of everything else that's transpired. So nobody's rectified it since. And you mentioned, the hospitals and nurses and doctors and stuff. There's some fabulous systems. Israel has a tremendous EMS system, emergency department system. There's some good things about the ones in the UK and the ones in Australia that we could emulate and, take from this, take from that. And that there's no wait time. And like, you look at a place like Israel where they're seeing some serious trauma on a regular basis, those poor people over there. In a lot of because of the fighting and the ongoing war and stuff, but there's no bottlenecks in those departments. And
yeah,
if you had leadership that looked at making a difference, things could change overnight.
No, I agree. And again, what's most disturbing to me is that this so-called COVID crisis and 800 patients are on the verge of collapsing our system. And to think that we spent $20 billion here in the province and $350 billion federally, and our healthcare system is no more robust. It's actually weakened. But I just got to read the comments here from Renee. I spent 10 hours in an ER hallway with my 2 EMS 7 years ago. There were 9 other EMS with their patients that day. Until people see it for themselves, they don't believe how bad it is. And thanks for sharing that, Renee. It is incredible. And again, to go back, and we're not here to criticize. You haven't spent the last 12 years criticizing. You've been sharing experiences to try and get the system fixed. And there's just so many simple things, like you say, just inter-hospital transfers, to have a crew that does that, to have a crew that brings people in from High River to Calgary or other areas. There's just such an efficiency there. If this was a true business and you had managers that were managing the hospitals. But I've also been told this, and you can maybe say yay or nay. I know it's not your department, but I've talked to other paramedics who've said that they're sitting there in line. They've seen I'm not sure who even makes the decision that, wow, we're getting backed up, we need to call another doctor. But the doctors actually get to make the decision and say, no, we're okay, we can handle it. Because if another doctor comes in, the pie is split up. Instead of with 2, it's with 3. Instead of 3, it's with 4. Do you have any knowledge on that? And do you feel, is that one of the other problems, is that there should be a hospital administrator that says, wow, we need to call 1 or 2 more doctors in here. This is a bad day and the ambulances are backing up and we got to do something?
It could be. I'm not familiar enough to comment on that. But last winter,
David, I've lost it. You need to ring me in here.
I can still hear you, Paul.
David, can you call me back? I've lost the link. Okay, I've got you back, George. So
I say I'm not competent enough to comment on that so much. But last winter, there was I think it was a Saturday. They call it Black Saturday or something. They had like 150 or 200 car accidents all of a sudden, big snowstorm and a mess. And somebody somewhere got the word out to the hospitals that we're getting slammed here. We can't have these crews sitting in the hospital hallways. And they were in and out of there just slick as could be. That system worked just great for that period of time, that day. which tells me that if the will is there, it can be done easy enough.
Yeah.
But by the next
I've
day,
been
that
told
night shift,
before.
right back to where we were before. Nothing changed. Like, hey, this works really good. We get these crews in and out of here. Let's keep doing this. Nope. As soon as that little rush is over, we go back to doing the same thing we've always done, which is crazy.
Yeah, I just find it incomprehensible. I don't know why we can't figure this out, and why we keep, what did Einstein say? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again,
Yeah.
and expecting a different outcome. And David, can you mute the double feed? I don't know if everybody's hearing that or just me.
And
There.
interesting enough,
Nope, now I can't even hear you. Oh, there.
Interesting enough, there's been lots of very good, viable solutions handed into EMS management and AHS management. Nothing.
Yeah.
Like, if you guys can't figure this out, we'll tell you how to do it. They still won't do it.
David, are there any questions on here that people that would be for George? I've kind of been scrolling through here. Got one here, thanks for what you do, George. I know you've been flogging this dead horse for some time. It's a management and a money problem. God knows there's enough management. Oh boy, do we ever. Here's one here. What's the occupation that has the most likelihood of putting people in the hospital? Maybe it's EMS. I don't know. But David, is there, let's see, maybe there should be an app when you're heading back that they already have the replacement stock picked. Quite possible. Here's another one. Andrew, I worked at the Edmonton EMS from 2008 to 2015. Same old problems. Good to see you, George. Still leading a voice. So from Andrew, he says thank you. Here's another comment. I agree with that, but every dollar wasted is just that, wasted. Here's from Jim. I would suggest that our EMS being true heroes is not the strain on any budget. And again, I guess we should talk about that we continue to hear and see from government that, we've got to, we got to squeeze on this area, we got to squeeze there. And I don't understand why they don't understand that it's not the front line that needs to be squeezed. And I remember a story from Steve West when he was reducing one of the government departments, and he went to the heads of the departments and he says, look, I want a breakdown of all of the expenses, our frontline workers and this and that. And the budget, I think, if my memory was right, is around $120 million for that department. And anyways, the management came back and showed him some stuff. And he says, well, no, what's the frontline workers cost us? What's it cost to be, operating the front line? Anyways, they came back and they ended up, it was $70 million. And he says, well, where's the other 50 million? And the guy says, well, it didn't ever answer. And so he finally answered for him. He says, that's management. We've got 50 million out of 120 million that was going to management and 70 million to front line. And for whatever reason, management has this idea that they're the important ones and that the front line couldn't function without them. And that if we got to make any cutbacks, they always push it to the front line, and then people are screaming, at the system. But George, I know that our viewers want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank you. The best thing is for a new year is for people to realize and watch this, that there are solutions. And I would agree with you. I doubt that we'll embarrass Alberta Health Services or anyone else, the EMS, to actually make the changes that are needed. But just want to thank you for coming on, and want to thank all the listeners for coming on. And we'll look forward to the next one, and take care, and God bless you in this new year, because we need a lot of help. So thank you and good night.
Thanks, Paul. Good night.